I skipped the family cruise, and my parents went crazy because they treat me poorly and idolize my brother. I'm not even sure when it began, but I felt like my brother Felix and I belonged to two different houses. Perhaps I first became aware of the OBVYS difference in how we were treated in high school. Felix had been found to be a drug dealer. My parents said it wasn't a huge thing, just a difficult time he was going through. However, after I was found smoking marijuana, it seemed as though I had set the home on fire. My mind was racing as my parents, Roger and Gail, threatened to expel me. My parents would give Felix a blanket and claim he was merely experimenting, but I recognized then that Felix might set the world on fire. They would contact the fire department, and I could light a match. This disparity simply widened over time. Felix, frequently referred to as the golden child, left college 3 times. My parents dismissed it as inconsequential each time. He's still finding himself, they would say. In the meantime, they chastised me for not trying hard enough, and I graduated from college a semester. My achievements never seemed sufficient. I got my first serious work as a technical writer by the time I was 22 in 2020. I was really pleased with myself. However, that moment was short-lived. I was immediately removed from my parents' health insurance. They cut me off entirely as a kind of reward for my independence, proof that I could manage alone. Felix, meanwhile, continued to be covered by their insurance until last year when he turned 26. I had to stand on my own 2 feet for 4 more years, whether I was ready or not, while still being treated like a child. The imbalance grew unavoidable. Over time, Felix continued to reside in Colorado, the state where he had left college. My parents paid him money for basics, bills and rent, even though he didn't work or attend school. With this assistance, what did he do? Yes, he purchased a Dula $22,000 for himself. I recall listening to my parents rave about Felix's new German Shepherd, Vic, as I sat in my tiny apartment making a grocery budget. The worst of it was when I was fired in early 2023 at the age of 24 due to the company's downsizing. I was no longer able to afford rent. I was forced to return to Oklahoma City, my hometown. My parents made me feel much more like a failure than I already did. I found a new position in May 2023 after months of looking for work. They surprised me by claiming I owed them Dula $10,000 in unpaid rent on the day. I happily informed them of my new job. Yes, you read correctly, Dula $10,000. When I moved in, we hadn't even talked about rent. My parents agreed to let me stay till I recovered. I helped out where I could by doing freelance work and contributing to groceries, but all of a sudden, they determined that I owed them for each month that I had been. I was aware that resisting would just exacerbate the situation. Confrontation was never well received by Gail or Roger. I made the payment. I worked really hard, saved as much money as I could, and paid them off by September 2023, right before I moved in with my lover, Gus. The problem with my parents is that even after Felix depleted their finances for his unsuccessful college attempts, they never asked for anything from me. But me, they were prepared to take advantage of me as soon as I had a steady job. I still hear my mother say, "We're just motivating you to be independent, Tanya." I wanted to yell. I was self-sufficient already. I had been all along. The cruise was the last straw. My parents revealed their ambitious idea for a family trip in late September. They suggested it would be a lovely week-long Thanksgiving vacation, a cruise. I recall how my mother's face brightened as she talked about how much fun we would have and how wonderful it would be if Felix and his girlfriend, Lynn, could come. "Since you have a good job now, you can buy your own ticket," she added after giving me a quick glance. I was hit hard by the remark. I was taken aback. "Wait, you're paying for everyone else, but not me?" I responded. My mom rehearsed the statement. "Felix is still finding his way, and Lynn's family isn't well off. You can afford it, Tanya. It's not like you'd need a fancy room anyway." As if I should be thankful for simply being on the boat, crammed into a windowless cabin like an afterthought. They rationalized, not a fancy room? I wish to draw attention to the hypocrisy. Why was Felix receiving a suite if the rooms weren't important? If he was still finding himself at almost 30, why wasn't he paying his own expenses? I, of course, argued. I could afford the ticket, so it wasn't about the money. It has to do with justice. But when it comes to Felix, there's no such thing as fairness in my family. "Green isn't a good look on you, Tanya," my mother replied, shaking her head. Green, jealousy, more than anything, I detest that word. They always use it as an excuse, as if my annoyance is unjustified and my emotions are unworthy simply because I don't accept their OBVYS partiality. That evening, I left their home in a rage. Gus, who has always been there for me, VY said me not to go. You don't owe them this, he stated. I agreed with him. For the first time, I decided that I was not going. There was silence in the weeks before Thanksgiving. I always changed my mind, so my parents believed I would too. They believe I'm too terrified to upset the status quo and too weak to confront them. I let them believe it. This time, though, I didn't let them know I wouldn't be attending as they confirmed their plans, made hotel reservations, and discussed all of the excursions they would be going on. I remained silent. They didn't text me until the evening before the trip. Be here by 8 a.m. so we could drive to New Orleans. Don't be late, wrote my dad. With my chest constricted, I gazed at the message. I then replied as follows. Since you didn't think I was worth the effort to include, I'll be spending Thanksgiving with Gus's family instead. Have a great trip with your favorite child. I then turned off the group chat. I felt powerful for the first time in years, as if I was choosing myself above their unachievable demand. I accepted the invitation from Gus's family to spend Thanksgiving at their cabin in Arkansas. I owed my parents nothing, not my money, not my time, and definitely not an apology. Gus grinned and gave me a forehead kiss when I informed him about the text. When he said good for you, I wish I could describe how fantastic it didn't, at least not yet. Even when you know you're right, there's something about confronting your parents that makes you feel uneasy. However, I had had enough of being there after. I had had enough of second place. There was silence in my flat on the morning of the cruise, like the quiet before a storm. An odd silence descended upon everything. I stared at my muted phone while sipping my coffee. I knew they would begin messaging me shortly to inquire about my whereabouts and to remind me that the car was scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. My dad calling to inquire whether I needed gas money for the drive was something I partially expected. My phone vibrated on the counter at 8:15. As I let it buzz, I saw it glow against the rock like a firefly. Where are you? It's past 8, we waiting. I saw my mother looking at the clock and shaking her head, and I could almost hear her sigh of impatience. My dad had joined in by 8:30 using his typical direct tone. Tanya, we are vying for the port in 10 minutes. You need to hurry up. I had been rushing to fulfill their expectations, which weren't the same for Felix for years. I could see my brother half sleeping in the back seat of the car, laughing and cheerful. He most likely didn't even realize or give a damn that I wasn't coming, rubbing his eyes from sleep. Gus entered the kitchen as he poured himself a cup of coffee. Coffee? He inquired. They text you yet? When I answered, of course they did. They'll figure it out soon enough. He gave me the look that indicated, I know this is difficult, but I'm proud of you. It wasn't easy. Despite my desire to feel victorious, I was unable to do so. I felt as though a brick had been placed against my heart. I asked abruptly, do you think I'm being petty? Gus took a seat across from me and spoke in a steady, calm tone. Tanya, they made this choice. You're just showing them what it feels like to be left out. But they're my parents, I shouldn't. Gus put his elbows on the table and leaned forward. Your parents treat Felix like he walks on water and act like you're a burden. You've bent over backward for them your whole life. You're not being petty, you're setting a boundary. Despite the fact that my stomach ached, I nodded. Their texts became increasingly desperate as the group chat began to hum once more. At last, I grabbed my phone, typed one message, and pressed send. Since you didn't put in the effort to include me, I will be attending Thanksgiving with Gus's family instead. Have a great trip with your favorite child. I then placed the phone face down on the table, muted the conversation. Gus gave a small smile. You're allowed to put yourself first, Tanya. All I could hope was that it would begin to feel that way. We prepared Gus's vehicle for the trip to his family's cabin that afternoon. Months before, almost as an afterthought, his mother, Wendy, had extended an invitation to me. She had called and said, we'd love to have you join us for Thanksgiving if you're... I dismissed it at the moment, thinking I would be with my own Now it seemed weird, like if the cosmos had known all along. My chest started to relax as we made our way toward the cabin along winding back road. The naked trees of late November stretched out like bony fingers toward the pale sky as the surrounding area opened up around us. I allowed the silence to envelop me like a blanket as I gazed out the window. After some time, Gus said, are you okay? I will be, I muttered. I wanted to be true, but I wasn't sure whether it was. We were warmly received by Gus's family. His mother waved and smiled broadly as soon as we drew into the driveway and came out onto the porch. Like a cozy fire on a chilly night, Wendy was one of those people who instantly put you at rest. I'm so glad you're here, Tanya, she said as she came down the stairs to give me a hug. I returned her hug with a smile. Thank you for HVYing me. Of course, we're thrilled to have you join us. Gus, grab her bags and get inside before you both freeze. The aroma of freshly baked pies and roasting turkey filled the cabin like a warm remembrance. While Gus's younger relatives raced around the Lee VY-ing room, Gus's father, Ned, was in the kitchen basting the turkey. I couldn't recall the last time I had entered a family get-together, felt accepted and included. With a kind grin, when he gave me a glass of wine. Your family here, Tanya. Relax and enjoy yourself. Even though it was the most straightforward thing, I almost started crying. Gus and I got up early the following day, Thanksgiving VYing morning, to assist with the preparation. While she and Ned worked on the food, his mother assigned us to arrange the table. The clatter of dishes, music, and laughter filled the place with VY-tality, like a scene from a MOVY I'd always wanted to be. It was crazy in the greatest way. I smiled as I watched Gus fold napkins in a tidy triangle. What? He smiled at me and inquired. Nothing, I replied. It's just nice being here. He grabbed my hand and squeezed it. You deserve this, Tanya. We went outdoors to play cornhole with Gus's cousins after supper. Naturally, I was awful. My aim was as precise as a kid throwing darts while wearing a blindfold. However, no one gave a damn. Gus burst out laughing as I missed the board entirely for the third time. He put an arm around my shoulder, teasingly said, You hopeless. I'm trying my best, I answered, sharing his laughter. From across the yard, his cousin, Essie, who couldn't have been older than 12, spoke up. You're doing great, Tanya. My mom says it's about HVYing fun, not winning. I grinned. I'll take it. We gathered around the fire pit that night, drinking hot cocoa while covered in blankets. Wendy distributed marshmallows to be roasted. I felt calmer than I have in years as I watched the flames dance before. I was treated like a member of Gus's family. No one made me feel alienated or asked me where I belonged. I didn't feel the need to prove myself to anyone for once. Wendy smiled softly at me as we sat gazing at the flickering embers toward the end of the night. Tanya, I know this is ultimately up to Gus, but I hope you'll join our family for real someday. I was taken aback by what she said, and my cheeks began to blush. I muttered I would be honored. Then I meant it too. I felt lighter than I had in a long time as I laid in bed with Gus that night and looked up at the ceiling, whispering, Thank you for bringing me here. Gus turned over on his side and gave me a look. You're welcome, but you don't have to thank me, Tanya. You belong here. His words sank in like rain after a drought, and I blinked back tears. This was where I belonged. I didn't have to plead for morsels of affection or struggle for a seat at the table. As I was sufficient. I felt free for the first time in my life. The Saturday following Thanksgiving VYing, I felt lighter than I had in months when I woke up with laughter, food, warmth, and no expectations other than simply being. Gus's family made things seem so easy. You don't have to earn that kind of love, and I didn't understand how hungry I was. It was a quiet drive back to Dallas as we discussed everything and nothing, including our plans for Christmas, future hikes, and how awful I was at cornhole. The trees outside became hazy striations of brown and yellow over the course of those few hours. I laughed more than I had all year. However, such lightness was short-lived. I finally picked up my phone when we returned to my place. I nearly felt bad about turning it back on after not checking it all week. With dozens of unread messages, pictures, and even a few missed calls, the group chat had blown up as the screen filled with notifications. I gazed at it. There were photos from the cruise. One of my parents smiling and sunburned, drinking, another of Felix and Lynn on the ship's deck with the ocean behind them like an infinite blue dream. Then the text arrived, sad that you chose not to be with your family in such beautiful places. In those remarks, I could practically hear my dad's voice, composed, measured, and tinged with a hint of judgment. He never used the exact words, but it was the kind of message that made me feel bad. As I continued to scroll, I came across a text from my mother. You should have been there. I hope you realize what you missed out on. What did I miss? I pondered, but what did they miss? What about how they treated me, as though I wasn't important enough to start with? I read the text again and again while sitting on the edge of the couch. My cheeks flushed. Gus saw right away. He put his arm around my shoulders and sat down next to me. What did they say? To let him see, I held out the phone silently. Same old story, I muttered. I should feel bad for missing out, not the other way around. Gus let out a sigh. You don't have to justify your choices to them, Tanya. I answered, I know, but I didn't feel like I knew anything. My mom's name appeared on my phone a few minutes later. A tiny part of me that still yearned for their acceptance picked up the phone when I considered ignoring it. She said, "Were you?" right away. Although it wasn't soft, her voice wasn't angry either, like a question with only one valid response. It was incisive. "I told you," I said, attempting to sound steady. "I spent the holiday with Gus's family." "You could have told us sooner, Tanya," she replied. "Do you know how cruel it was for you to let us believe you were coming and then just not show up?" I tried to suppress my fury by closing my eyes. "Mom, you told me to buy my own ticket. You didn't make me feel like I was part of the plan." She became defensive in tone. "We told you because you can afford it. It's not like you're struggling, Tanya. Felix and Lynn needed the help." Even though I detested that it was true, I said, my voice trembling now. I didn't, Mom. "I've spent my whole life VYing to earn everything. You've handed Felix everything on a silver platter. I'm the one who gets called ungrateful." She yelled, "That's not fair, Tanya. Felix needs help right now. You've always been independent. You don't understand how hard it is." She seemed to have slapped me. I swallowed, the old familiar frustration that tried to get at my throat. I muttered, "I'm independent because you never gave me a choice." She was silent for a long time. At last, she stated, "I'm not going to apologize for raising a strong daughter. You should be grateful for everything we've done for you." The phrase grateful felt like sandpaper against my flesh. All my life, I had been thankful for crumbs of affection, for unmet expectations, and for family holidays to which I was not in VY unless I covered the cost myself. I was at my breaking point. "I guess I'll just leave you alone," I replied, "since I'll never be enough for this family." And before she could reply, I hung up, and the tears eventually came. With my entire body trembling, I buried my face in my hand. Immediately, Gus was there, sitting beside me and embracing me. "It's okay," he muttered. "You're okay." However, I didn't feel well. No matter how many times Gus assured me that I was sufficient, I knew that my parents would never be able to fill the void in my... Gus and I shared a pint of ice cream on the couch for the remainder of the evening in an attempt to escape the weight of it all. We watched old films. Even though the tears were still threatening to come back, I allowed myself to laugh when Gus cited the corny dialogue. I felt empty by the time I went to bed. I got up early for work the following morning. There was silence on my phone. No texts, no calls were missed. In some ways, my parents' silence was worse than their rage. They seemed to be waiting for me to say I was sorry and that I had overreacted as I often had in the past. But I wasn't going to this time. I immersed myself in my job, utilizing the diversion to prevent myself from reflecting on everything that had transpired. I sent emails, re-VY said technical manual, and acted as if nothing was wrong when my coworkers inquired about my Thanksgiving VYing. I consistently responded with the same response. "It was nice. I spent it with Gus's family." I kept the argument with my parents a secret from them. I kept the pictures, the texts, and the phone call that left me sobbing on the couch a secret. In actuality, I was ashamed that after everything they had done to me, I still desperately craved their acceptance. Gus and I sat on my apartment's balcony that evening and watched the distant blinking city lights. At last, I said, "I don't know why it's so hard." "Because of your parents," Gus said. "You want them to love you the way you deserve. That's not a bad thing." I muttered, "But what if they never will?" After a period of silence, Gus said, "Then maybe you have to stop asking." I knew he was right, so his comments were like a kick to the belly. I had begged for something my parents couldn't VY to me with all my life. Perhaps it was time to give up. However, I wasn't yet prepared. My mother texted me when I woke up the following morning, "We need to talk before Christmas. Let us know when you're free." I placed my phone down after staring at the message for a while. Christmas. That meant something to them. They didn't want the rest of the family to know why I wasn't there. They would want me to act like nothing had occurred, play nice, and smile for photos. However, I wasn't sure if I could still do it. I didn't anticipate how much the weeks before Christmas would weigh on me, like a burden I couldn't release. My mom's text about VYing to talk hung in the back of my mind. At first, I thought they would just disregard it. However, I was acquainted with my parents. They weren't the type to tolerate unresolved conflict, particularly if it meant looking foolish in front of the other members. I still hadn't responded by the middle of December. The messages began to come in once more. My dad joined in this time. "We can't just leave things like this, Tanya. Family means something. Let us know when we can talk. Family means something." I sat with those words for a long time, mentally reciting them over and over again. How did they define family? Tom discovered me sitting at the table with my head in my hands in the kitchen that evening. I had been mentally going over the exchange with my mother over and again, analyzing each word, tone, and pause. Gus gently pulled out a chair to sit across from me and asked what happened. They wanted to come for Christmas, I replied. She didn't apologize, though, not really. It's like they don't even understand what they've done. With a groan, Gus reached for my hand. Do you want to go? I gave a head shake. I don't know. I mean, part of me wants to. It's Christmas. I don't want to lose my whole family, but it hurts to keep pretending nothing's wrong. He concluded for me. Yeah, I muttered. Gus gave me a handshake. Then don't go, Tanya. You don't have to keep putting yourself in situations that hurt you. But if I don't go, they'll tell everyone I'm being selfish, I replied. They'll make it sound like I'm the problem. My mom knows how to twist things, so it looks like I'm the bad guy. Gus remained silent for a while, as if he was attempting to find the proper words. Then he stated, it doesn't matter what they tell other people, you know the truth. I could feel the pressure building as Christmas drew near. My mother contacted me twice more and left identical-sounding voicemail. She desired to make things more amicable. She desired the family's unity. She wished for me to let go of the past. I didn't return her call. My dad eventually sent a message the day before Christmas Eve. This has gone on long enough. Tanya, you're coming to Christmas. We'll talk it out like adults, and then we'll move forward. It was an order, not a request. Before I erased the message, I looked at it for a while. Gus and I packed the car and headed back to his parents' property on Christmas, as if she had been waiting for us all morning. Wendy welcomed us with a platter of cookies and a low VY embrace. Squeezing my arm, she added, I'm so glad you're here. I grinned, but my eyes didn't see it. I knew my parents would spend the day acting like everything was fine, but the truth was that I felt bad, guilty for not being. I pictured them at the dinner table with my mom passing around the mashed potatoes, Felix giggling at something. I pondered whether they would inform everyone that I was too busy to go or that I was simply being challenging. I must have been deep in thought when Gus bent over, said in a whisper, Hey, you don't have to feel bad about choosing yourself. I know, I muttered. His family and I sat by the fire that afternoon and opened gifts. Gus's father gave me a mug that read, You're part of the family whether you like it or not. And when he gave me a knitted scarf that was the softest thing I had ever felt. I almost started crying, but everyone laughed. I now understood what Christmas could be like for the first time in my life. Cozy, stress-free, and effortless. No one was being cautious. No one was keeping score. It was love, pure and unreserved. I grinned as I turned to face Gus. Perhaps this was how family was meant to feel. For once, I didn't feel like I was stepping on minefield. As Christmas went by in silence, there were no harsh words, tight smiles, or passive-aggressive remarks to spoil the occasion. And Gus's family made the holiday feel effortless. After holding my breath for too long, I felt calm when I woke up the following morning as though I had finally figured out what it meant to release it. However, that tranquility was short-lived. After 2 days, I turned my phone back on and discovered just what I had anticipated. Texts, voicemails, and missed calls. My absence had not gone overlooked, and my family had spent the holiday together. Late on Christmas night, my mother sent a message. We missed you today, Tanya. Your absence really hurt your father. That was it. There were no explanations, no attempt to find out why I had avoided them, and no expression of regret for how they had made me feel so inferior. Rather, the responsibility had returned to me. The issue was me. They had been harmed by me. My parents seemed to live in a whole separate reality where my emotions were non-existent unless they caused annoyance to another else. The shame hung like smoke in the back of my mind, but I chose to disregard the message and resume my life. A part of me knew that the decision I had taken was the right one. Why, though, did everything still feel so off? A few days later, Gus and I were watching a movie when my phone called. It was Felix, my brother. I hesitated when I saw his name on the screen. Felix didn't call me very much. He preferred to keep his hands clean and avoided getting involved in any arguments with our parents most of the time. Quietly, I asked Gus, should I answer it? His words, it's up to you, came as he squeezed my hand. After a moment of hesitation, I swiped the screen. Hello, Tanya, Felix remarked in a cool, clipped voice. What the hell happened? I allowed a sigh. What do you mean? I mean Christmas, he continued, his voice beginning to grow irritated. Mom and Dad were a wreck. They said you just ignored them and ruined the holiday. I saw jaw getting tense. I didn't ruin anything, Felix. I chose not to come because I'm tired of being treated like I don't matter. Felix exhaled, vyly, the way he always did when he felt I was being tough. Why do you have to make everything a big deal, Tanya? They're trying their best. No, they're not. I remarked sharply. Felix, they treat you like you're perfect. They pay for everything you need and never expect you to stand on your own. Meanwhile, I get Dula 10,000 in rent thrown at me the second I get a new job. Do you not see how unfair that is? Adams comments, you're just jealous. We as recognizable as an old scar. You always have been. Again, that word, jealous, as if my desire for justice made me the bad guy. With my voice trembling, I tightened my hold on the phone. I'm not jealous, Felix. I'm exhausted. You get to make mistakes and get help. I don't. I have to be perfect just to earn the bare minimum, and I'm tired of it. Maybe if you stopped acting like a VY Tim they treat you differently, Felix replied bluntly. I thought he had slapped me. I was momentarily unable to even reply. That one sentence seemed to crush every shred of hope I had ever had for my brother. He was unable to comprehend. He didn't know I was the issue for him. It was me who created the commotion. At that moment, I understood that I had been mistaken to believe that Felix may one day see things for what they truly were. I replied softly, "Goodbye, Felix," and hung up before he could answer. I hid my face in my hands and placed the phone on the table. Even though I didn't want to cry, I did. Without a word, Gus grabbed me into his arms and let me express everything. He doesn't get it, I muttered after some time. He never will. I know, Gus said, but that's not your fault, Tanya. I couldn't stop thinking about that phone talk with Felix in the days that followed. I repeatedly rehearsed his remarks in my mind in the hopes that they might lessen the pain. However, they didn't. I reflected on how close we had been as children. Felix was my hero back then. He stayed up late playing VY Deo games with me and taught me how to ride a bike. When I was being teased at school, he was the one who defended me. I had believed that Felix was the only one who truly understood me. However, things had changed. At some point, Felix had been more than glad to take the perks my parents gave him without question, and their partiality had caused a rift between us. I wanted to think he still secretly cared for me. In actuality, though, he had sided with them perhaps he didn't think, so perhaps he believed he was merely maintaining harmony. However, it seemed like a betrayal to me. Although I wasn't con VY and said that version of my brother still existed, I still missed him. Gus and I observed the city lights one evening while sitting on the balcony covered with blankets after a hard day. The crisp but chilly air felt rejuvenating like a reset button. I've been thinking, I muttered. About what? Gus asked me as he turned to face me. About cutting contact with them, I replied. Speaking the words aloud felt liberating, but they also felt heavy. I mean, not completely, not yet, but maybe I need to put some real distance. I need a break from all of this. Gus gave a nod. You don't have to explain it to me, Tanya. I think it's the right move. The words, I feel guilty, I said. They're still my family. And if I walk away, they'll tell everyone I'm the problem. I don't want to lose the rest of my family, too. Gus grabbed my hand as he reached over. Tanya, you can't control what they say about you. You can't change the way they see things, but you don't deserve to keep putting yourself through this just to make them happy. I took a deep breath while gazing at the skyline. I don't know if I'm strong enough to do it. You are, Gus asserted decisively. You've been strong your whole life, Tanya, but this time you're being strong for yourself. That's different. I listened to what he had to say. Perhaps he was correct. I had spent years trying to prove myself to my parents and going out of my way to get their love and acceptance. But it was never enough no matter how hard I tried. Perhaps it was time to give up. Perhaps I should have chosen myself instead. I took a seat that evening and composed a letter to my parents. Mom, Dad, for a while I need some space. I love you both, but I can't keep acting like everything is all right when I'm sick of being compared to Felix and feeling unimportant. I need time to decide what kind of relationship I want with you, so I need to take a break until then. I hope you understand. Before I pushed submit, I looked at the message for a long time. I experienced a peculiar sensation of relief when I eventually did, as if I had finally let go of something I had been clinging to for too long. With his hand on my knee, Gus sat next to me. How do you feel? Scared was my honest response, but also lighter. He smiled as he remarked, that's a good start, and I believed him for the first time in years.